Greetings once again, Retreat Church. Hey, creating togetherness that brings depth, growth, and love into our lives is not easy because we have to include people in our lives that don't naturally think like we do, don't behave like we do. Maybe they're not into the same hobbies or go to the same places, have the same background that we do. But that's the requirement. You see, growth and depth and love don't really come from surrounding ourselves with people just like us, because we're not challenged. We're never encouraged to think outside of our own limitations, and then we're kind of bound to keep creating and the own problems for ourselves and having the same mistakes in our lives. And so in order to create togetherness that brings depth, love, and growth to our lives, we're going to need to step out and venture out and to be together with people that aren't really like us. And one thing I love about the church, and I know one of the pushbacks against the Christian church, is that the Christian church forces everybody to think like they do. And that's true in one regards, as far as we all that belong to the church, we all want you to follow Jesus. And in that sense, yes, we're trying to get you to think like us. But in so many different ways in how we express that and how we go about following Jesus, there's a lot of differing opinions about that, and for many reasons. And what I've learned in my own life, even though I'm a person that really, I thrive on figuring things out for myself, and if I can't figure things out for myself, then I get a little frustrated. But that's more about pride than it is about growth and about depth and about love. And so that God has put me in some interesting places where I can't figure things out, and I do need other people. And even when I have fought that, sometimes I start to look for people that are like me or that have similar background that I do. And God has sometimes forced me into positions where people that are very different than me are needed, and then I have to create this oneness with them so that I can listen and I can grow and I can deepen my understanding of humanity, myself, and God, right? So there are a few ways that we can go about creating this type of togetherness that would bring depth, love, and growth into each one of our lives. And just very quick today, I want to bring to your attention a couple of those. The first one is togetherness is created by God as He enables us to speak to diverse people. And this is what happened in the book of Acts. This is what launched the church, that God actually launched the church through enabling His people to speak to people of different languages, different cultural backgrounds, different traditions, different religious perspectives, that God, by the power of His Holy Spirit, enabled people to do that in Acts chapter 2. It's a wonderful story of how God launched the church in a very diverse way. There's also another way that God does this, and that is challenging for me and for you, and that is that togetherness is created as we step out and meet one another's needs. We see this in the book of Acts as well in chapter 2. Later on, as the church is then birthed, we get this depiction of this picture of the church that says that that all the fellow believers had all things in common, and they shared with one another as each one had needs. And so their needs were there, and they were present and known to people. And then those with resources were able to meet the needs of those without resources. And the attitude that kind of bound them together was this attitude of they believed that nothing was truly just ours, that all that I possess and the Lord has allowed me to have, that they're kind of stewards of that and managers of that, and they move that stuff around, that they didn't hold on to their possessions with a clenched fist or greedy hearts. Another way in the Bible, specifically in the book of Acts, that this type of togetherness is created is that it is created by providing both opportunity and responsibility. That opportunity and responsibility go together, and as those in leadership positions and those with resources and those with opportunity give opportunity to those without it, but then require of them to step up and actually fulfill the responsibilities that are required, that's when this kind of togetherness begins to be created, that creates love, hope, and depth. We see that depth, I said death there, oops. Some of you are going to make fun of me for that, and I probably deserve it. All right, so all the jokes can go in the comment section. That's just fine. Just don't text me. So, but togetherness was created in Acts chapter 6 as the Hellenists there, the Greek-speaking Christians, and and Jews, they felt neglected. They felt as though their widows were not being given what they were required to have and needed. And so what happens is men full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom and good reputation were appointed. And you'll notice, you'll read these names in Acts chapter 6 are all Greek. That those Jews that were in charge of the distribution heard the people with the complaint, called the people with the complaint into leadership, gave them opportunity, but then called them to responsibility. And it was a beautiful way to create togetherness in the meeting of each other's needs and creating opportunity and responsibility among the Jews of the first century. And then lastly, we notice later on in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 10, Peter, one that had prided himself in his Jewishness, he then is confronted by God by being called by God to go minister to a Roman centurion named Cornelius. And now a Roman centurion was in charge of 100 Roman soldiers. And so Peter, in all of his Jewishness, had this intense struggle with God. And in fact, God had to basically show him a vision of different animals and then call Peter to go ahead and take and eat. And Peter makes that famous statement, "Not so, Lord," right? And he's like, "I've never eaten that." He literally tells God in one sentence that he's Lord, but also no, which is kind of indicative of our own struggle, right? We call him Lord, but we fuss with him. And so Peter then had to be challenged, and Peter was instructed there not to call unclean what God had called clean, as God began to open the doors of the church to those that previously did not have the opportunity. So you see all of that going on as God launched his church in the book of Acts, and how he was creating this oneness out of a diverse population group as a global church was being birthed right there in the first century. And so if you and I want to create this type of togetherness within our diverse and divided community, we're going to have to do something that's a little tricky for us, a little hard, and that forms our challenge for this week. And our challenge for this week is this: to create the togetherness that we've been discussing, but without turning a blind eye to the commands of God. Because it's easy to remove all the standards or remove all the expectations and all the commands of God and say, let's just be together as people. Let's just let each other live however live. And that, I think, creates a false oneness, because it's really not a unity or a oneness at all. In fact, it's just letting everybody be individuals in the truest sense. And so we're going to have to dig down deep with that. We're going to have to get into the scriptures. We're going to have to pray for wisdom. And like God did in the first century in Acts chapter 2, may the Holy Spirit fill us for the task. God bless you. We'll see you next time.